There will no doubt be spoilers in this review, so you have been warned. And with that out of the way, holy shit! After 21 films over the span of 11 years, Marvel finishes off their Infinity Stone storyline with Avengers Endgame, the highly anticipated sequel to last year's Infinity War and one of the most ambitious films of this generation. And holy crap, does it deliver! Not only did they improve on problems I had with Infinity War and other installments in the franchise, but in doing so also created a satisfying conclusion to the series and an emotional farewell to many of the longtime cast members throughout the films. One of the most notable elements and improvements from past installments was the screenplay. And a big reason for why it works this time around is that the film mixes comedy and drama in a way that doesn't feel forced and perfectly matches the tone the film sets up, which has been a major problem for many of the other MCU movies. Films like Doctor Strange, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, and even Infinity War had pretty weak scripts dialogue-wise that either couldn't blend both elements convincingly, resulting in a massive tonal shift, or just didn't even try and had poorly written jokes that felt cringy and forced in to get a cheap laugh. But not only does Endgame's screenplay blend both elements in a way that feels natural and doesn't slow the narrative's momentum, but the comedy is much funnier than previous films and at times helps explain certain elements of the story in a way that the audience can digest. An example being when they're explaining time travel and how they compare it to other forms of pop culture. The acting is some of the best in the series, and you can clearly see that everyone brought their A-game to this film and were 100% invested in pulling this off. Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. are great and bring a satisfying conclusion to their characters. Chris Hemsworth is fantastic and completely reinvents his character, resulting in the best performance in my opinion. Jeremy Renner is much better utilized in other appearances and brings a much more entertaining and interesting portrayal to Hawkeye. Paul Rudd delivers an energetic comedic performance and delivers potentially bad dialogue in a way that makes it seem natural and hilarious. Mark Ruffalo, Scarlett Johansson, and Karen Gillan are all great and bring something new to their characters. And remember when I said that I hope the Russos fix Captain Marvel in my previous review? Well, they did something. They gave her less than 10 minutes of screen time, and I am eternally grateful for that. But rumour has it that they didn't even want her in the films but were obliged to include her by Disney, which resulted in her seeming very tacked on and felt like she was written in at the last minute. But taking her out of the picture, if Infinity War was impressive with how they managed to include 10 years worth of characters in a way that didn't feel overwhelming, this film goes the extra mile with how many characters they can fit into the story, but still keep the pacing consistent and giving enough screen time to everyone. Sure, you can argue that certain characters were very unnecessary, like Robert Redford, Tilda Swinton, and many others returning for small cameos, but unlike a film like Rogue One where the references have nothing to do with the story and distract from the plot, this film makes sure to utilize most of these characters in a way that helps contribute to the narrative. Sure, Redford, Grillo, and Hernandez were complete fan service, but honestly that just added to the fun and is exactly what I expect from this kind of movie, as it acts as both a climax and a form of reminiscing over the series, and the film's element of time travel really does emphasize this. And regarding the film's tone, even though it wasn't as heart-poundingly stressful as Infinity War, the feeling of tension and danger was still prevalent and still contained that idea that anything could happen. It was just that the film moved along at a slower pace with many rest breaks compared to Infinity War. All the fight scenes are very well done, and even though I do have some mixed feelings on how the Russo brothers film hand-to-hand combat, the rest were clear as day and are shot perfectly. One of the best fight scenes in the film, excluding the best finale of the series, was the first action scene with Hawkeye, which was shot in one take and was surprisingly kinda graphic and reminded me of Netflix's Daredevil. The soundtrack is definitely one of Marvel's best and was perfectly integrated into the film, resulting in it being used much more dynamically just like its predecessor. And the reincorporation of older music from the franchise adds some much needed nostalgia, and its use in the film feels appropriate and not forced in the slightest. Also, The Real Hero is now my favourite piece of Marvel music throughout the entire franchise. I really didn't have any major problems with this film, and the only things I could talk about were very minor and didn't ruin the movie in the slightest. This includes the acting not being that great from some of the supporting actors like Brie Larson, Elizabeth Olsen, and Alexandra Rachel Rabb, the aforementioned inclusion of Captain Marvel and how it just felt tacked on, there's some continuity errors sprinkled throughout, and sure, some of the comedy isn't that strong in parts, but honestly that's about it in terms of criticism. So to end this off, Avengers Endgame is one of the most daring and challenging movies I've ever seen, both in how it gives a perfect resolution to the Infinity Stone narrative, but also how it brings a heartfelt ending to many of the MCU characters that feels deserved and satisfying. It's honestly one of the best superhero films I've ever seen, and if I were to quit watching these films in the future, or if they would stop being produced, I would say this was the perfect ending to the franchise.